Chapter 1. The Morning of Infamy. Flight 11 and the North Tower. Section 1. Before the Dawn. The sun had not yet fully risen over the city of Boston. In the quiet neighborhoods near Logan Airport, the streets were empty, bathed in a dim orange hue from the streetlights. Inside one modest hotel room, Mohammed Atta opened his eyes at 5:02 a.m., his face calm, betraying none of the tension that lay beneath his mind. He rose silently, careful not to wake Abdul al-Omari, who lay on the adjacent bed, headphones in ears, listening to low murmurings of Arabic prayers. Atta methodically prepared for the day. He performed ablutions, recited brief prayers, and packed his bag with calculated precision. Every item, every piece of clothing, every document was carefully laid out. The two knives, small enough to bypass security yet lethal in confined spaces, were concealed in the folds of his coat. He checked the passports one last time, ensuring that the visas matched their identities and stories. Across the hall, two other hijackers moved with the same silent precision. None of them spoke unnecessarily. Every gesture, every movement was rehearsed over months. The room smelled faintly of cologne, coffee, and antiseptic cleaner. Outside, the early morning wind rustled the leaves of nearby oaks, and distant sounds of garbage trucks and the faint hum of early commuters could be heard. Atta paused at the window, looking out over the faint outlines of the city. The morning was serene, peaceful, a stark contrast to the storm of violence that was about to descend. Section 2. Arrival at Logan Airport. By 6:15 a.m., the hijackers were moving toward Logan Airport. The streets had begun to stir. Early commuters and delivery trucks filled the avenues. The team had mapped every route in advance, accounting for traffic, police patrols, and checkpoints. At the airport, they joined the steady flow of passengers, blending seamlessly with the crowd. Security in 2001 was comparatively lax. Metal detectors scanned pockets and belts, but there were no body scanners. Knives under 4 inches were permitted. Atta and al-Omari carried only small, seemingly innocuous items carefully concealed. They smiled at check-in clerks, spoke politely, and followed the expected procedures. Their calmness was unnerving in its precision, a mask for the deadly plan that lay beneath. The boarding gates were quiet, filled with early morning travelers, businessmen with briefcases, families dragging children and luggage, elderly couples clutching tickets. Flight attendants moved up and down the aisles, greeting passengers, assisting with bags, unaware of the impending chaos. Section 3. Boarding Flight 11. At 7:30 a.m., Flight 11 was ready for boarding. The Boeing 767, gleaming and imposing on the tarmac, reflected the rising sunlight off its fuselage. Atta was the first to board among the hijackers. His movements were deliberate, precise, and silent. Each step was a rehearsal of the countless simulations they had practiced in flight schools and rented apartments. Passengers filed in behind him. Among them was a businessman in a gray suit carrying a leather briefcase, a young couple holding hands, and a college student gripping a worn backpack. The ordinary humanity of the cabin contrasted sharply with the lethal intent of the men, silently entering from the rear. Atta moved to the back, nodding to his co-conspirators. They split. 2 went to the cockpit area, 2 to the mid-cabin. Muscle hijackers positioned themselves discreetly, observing passengers, identifying any potential threats or panic reactions. They had memorized every step, every reaction, every contingency. Section 4. Takeoff and initial flight.
7:59 a.m. Flight 11 lifted from Logan's runway,
Climbing steadily toward the crisp morning sky. Outside, the Massachusetts coast receded, the Atlantic glimmering under a sun that promised warmth and light. Inside, passengers settled into their seats, reading newspapers, dozing, and chatting quietly. Flight attendants made their rounds, unaware of the nightmare that was to unfold. At 8:14 a.m., 15 minutes into the flight, the hijackers executed the first stage of their plan. Atta and al-Omari moved to the cockpit. The doors were forced open. Pilots were overpowered, stabbed, and rendered incapacitated. Cabin panic began almost immediately. Muffled screams, cries for help, and whispered prayers filled the enclosed space. Betty Ong, a flight attendant, quickly reached a phone and called the FAA, her voice trembling. "We're being hijacked. Cockpit is not responding. They have knives. Please help." The world outside remained oblivious. In Boston's air traffic control room, controllers began to notice irregularities. Flight 11 was veering off course. Section 5, inside the North Tower, pre-impact. Meanwhile, in Manhattan, the early morning office environment continued as usual. Employees arrived at the North Tower, greeting one another, heading for elevators and coffee stations. In the 92nd floor offices, clerks were logging data, answering phones, and preparing for meetings. The calm was deceptive. No one could anticipate the massive steel and concrete leviathan that was hurtling toward them. When Flight 11 struck at 8:46:40 a.m., the impact was catastrophic. Floors 93-99 crumpled under the force, igniting fires fueled by thousands of gallons of jet fuel. A fireball erupted from the building's side, visible for miles. Those above the impact zone were trapped instantly. Stairwells and elevators were destroyed. Smoke and flame surged upward, making breathing nearly impossible. Section 6, Firefighters' Response. Outside, first responders raced to the scene. Fire engines screeched down streets, sirens wailing. Firefighters in full gear assessed the building, planning an ascent to rescue survivors. Each decision was critical. Time was fleeting. Radios crackled with urgency. Unit 1 to command. Reports of fire on floors 93-99. Multiple trapped. Stairwells inaccessible. The bravery of these men was unmatched. Climbing 40-plus flights with heavy gear, they moved against heat, smoke, and the threat of structural collapse, determined to save lives. Section 7, Passenger Perspective. Back in the cabin, passengers faced impossible decisions. Fear was tangible, the air thick with tension. Some whispered prayers. Others tried to calm children. Some began to comprehend the reality. This was no ordinary hijacking. The flight had become a weapon. Every heartbeat felt like an eternity. Through the airphones, messages were sent. We can't breathe. They're stabbing. We're trapped. Every message recorded by the FAA would later provide a chilling insight into the courage, fear, and humanity displayed in those final moments. Section 8, Media and Global Awareness. By 8:50 a.m., news helicopters in New York had captured the first images of the smoking North Tower. Television broadcasts began reporting, a small plane has hit the World Trade Center. Officials are investigating. Across the world, viewers assumed it might be a tragic accident, but in Boston, air traffic controllers knew differently. The anomaly was too precise, too coordinated. Flight 11's trajectory and communication indicated deliberate action. Section 9, Countdown to Impact. In the cockpit, Ada manipulated the controls with precision, turning the plane toward Manhattan. Passengers could see glimpses of the approaching skyline. Panic escalated. Flight attendants attempted to reassure passengers, though their own fear was evident. 8:46:40 a.m., North Tower impact. The explosive collision, fireball, and immediate chaos marked the beginning of a tragedy that would claim thousands of lives. Chapter 2, Flight 175 and the South Tower. Section 1, Morning Preparations. In the early morning of September 11, 2001, Boston's Logan Airport was alive with its usual bustle. Street lights flickered against the pale blue sky. Commuters scuttled toward the terminals. Taxis honked as they weaved through traffic, and luggage carts rattled along the polished floors. Amidst this mundane activity, Marwan al-Shehi and his co-conspirators moved with calculated precision. They were quiet, disciplined, and unnervingly calm. Every motion, from brushing teeth to putting on a suit, had been rehearsed countless times. Boarding passes were checked, carry-on bags carefully arranged, and the contents meticulously hidden. Unlike Flight 11, which had taken off on schedule, Flight 175 would be delayed by 28 minutes, but this did not concern them. The hijackers were trained to adapt and improvise. Outside, the sky remained clear, the morning sun climbing higher, its light reflecting off the steel of the Boston skyline. For the ordinary citizens, it was an ordinary Tuesday, but inside these planes, a storm of terror was meticulously unfolding. Section 2, Boarding and Takeoff. 14 a.m. Flight 175 began boarding. Passengers filed through the gate, some returning to work, some heading to vacations, some just starting their day. Among them were families, businessmen, students, and tourists. The hijackers boarded calmly, splitting positions as rehearsed. Ada's counterpart, Marwan al-Shehi, took control of the front section, while others stationed themselves strategically in the cabin. Inside the cabin, the hum of the air conditioning, The soft murmurs of passengers and the rolling of suitcases created a false sense of normalcy. The flight attendants greeted passengers warmly, unaware of the lethal plan being enacted mere steps away. At 8:14 a.m., Flight 175 finally lifted off the runway, ascending into the brightening sky. Outside, the Atlantic shimmered in the early sunlight. Inside, passengers settled in, talking, reading newspapers, and adjusting their headphones. None anticipated the horrors that would soon unfold. Section 3. Hijacking Initiation. Within minutes of takeoff, the hijackers moved. Like shadows, they approached the cockpit, weapons concealed, ready to execute the plan. Flight attendants noticed tension, subtle but unignorable. A passenger sensed something wrong as one hijacker repeatedly approached the front, pretending to check for storage space but keeping his eyes focused on the crew. The moment came swiftly. With minimal warning, the cockpit was breached. Pilots were overpowered. The sound of muffled screams, the shuffle of feet, and the faint thud of struggle filled the cabin. Panic was immediate. Passengers began to understand that this was not an ordinary hijacking. A few brave flight attendants managed to send coded messages via onboard phones, alerting the FAA, "We are being hijacked, knives." Cockpit breached multiple threats. In the air traffic control rooms, the tension escalated. Flight 175, unlike Flight 11, was delayed, but moving quickly toward its target. The controllers noted the erratic altitude changes, the deviations from standard flight paths, and the lack of communication from the cockpit. Section 4. Cabin Chaos. Inside the cabin, terror was palpable. Mothers clutched children, business people tried to stay calm, and some passengers whispered prayers under their breath. The hijackers' movements were precise. They controlled the aisles, monitored any defiance, and ensured that panic did not escalate beyond their control. Though fear had already begun to ripple through the cabin, flight attendants tried to calm passengers, but even their professional composure was strained. Sweat ran down foreheads, hearts pounded in chests, and every decision felt like it could determine life or death. Outside the airplane windows, the skyline of New York began to grow closer. Even from miles away, the towers loomed over the city like twin sentinels, unaware of the collision course about to be enacted. Section 5. Media coverage begins. By 8:50 a.m., news helicopters were capturing images of the North Tower. Already smoldering from Flight 11's impact, reporters speculated a small plane had hit the building. The South Tower's flight, still airborne, was unnoticed by the general public. Media crews prepared cameras, ready to broadcast the developing story live. The passengers and hijackers aboard Flight 175 were completely unaware of the full scale of the morning's chaos outside. Inside, the cabin tension reached its peak. Every breath, every movement, every whisper carried the weight of impending catastrophe. Section 6. Approach to Manhattan. Marwan al-Shehi guided the plane with precision. Following pre-planned GPS coordinates, passengers began to notice the skyline, and some sensed something was terribly wrong. The ordinary sound of city traffic, distant horns, and morning commotion felt oddly calm in contrast to the tension within the plane. Flight attendants tried to maintain order, walking the aisles, soothing the fearful, whispering instructions. The hijackers moved with silent authority, ensuring that no one attempted to interfere. Phones were used sparingly. Only a few managed to send last messages to loved ones, their words fragmentary and full of terror. The North Tower, still burning, was visible through the cabin windows. Smoke spiraled into the sky, and the faint screams from those trapped above reached even the distant streets. Section 7. The South Tower Impact. 9:03:11 a.m. Flight 5 collided with the South Tower between floors 77 and 85. The impact was instantaneous, catastrophic, and undeniable. A massive fireball erupted from the building, sending flames shooting outward. Windows shattered, steel beams groaned under the stress, and thousands of employees were instantly thrown into chaos. In the immediate vicinity, street-level pedestrians screamed, ran and ducked for cover. Cars swerved to avoid debris. Smoke billowed skyward, carrying ash over several blocks. Inside the plane, the hijackers had executed their mission flawlessly. The cabin was consumed with the shockwave of the collision. Passengers and crew aboard were killed instantly. Outside, the city watched in stunned disbelief, now fully aware that these were deliberate attacks. Section 8. Emergency Response. The fire department, already responding to the North Tower, now faced simultaneous chaos. Firefighters coordinated over radios, directing units to the South Tower, rerouting traffic and establishing command posts. Police evacuated nearby streets, guided citizens to safety, and attempted to manage the growing panic. Medical teams triaged victims both inside the towers and outside on the streets. Emergency operations centers received constant updates. Every minute counted. The scale of the disaster was quickly becoming apparent, and it was far from over. Section 9. Psychological Perspectives. Inside the South Tower, people faced an unimaginable reality. Smoke, fire, and the deafening roar of the collision created a surreal environment. Employees made split-second decisions: attempt to escape, find higher ground, help colleagues, or await rescue. Fear mingled with courage, desperation with determination. For those on Flight 175, realization dawned in the final moments. Some whispered prayers, others screamed. Some held hands with loved ones. Every heartbeat felt like an eternity. Every breath a miracle. Section 10. Global awareness escalates. By 9:10 a.m., media outlets around the world broadcast images of both towers. What had initially been assumed to be an accident was now unmistakably a coordinated terrorist attack. Air traffic control rooms scrambled. Military and government offices activated emergency protocols. From Boston to New York, ordinary citizens looked up at the sky bewildered. Smoke rose above Manhattan, visible from miles away. The world had changed irreversibly in a matter of minutes. Chapter 3. Flight 77 and the Pentagon. Section 1. Early morning departure. At Dulles International Airport, the morning sun reflected off the polished tarmac, bathing the air in soft golden light. Passengers waited at gate D26, checking tickets and sipping coffee. Some were traveling for business, others for family visits. Among them, Hani Hanjur and his fellow hijackers moved with disciplined calm. Their actions were inconspicuous, rehearsed over months. Hanjur adjusted his tie, straightened his jacket, and smiled politely at a passing flight attendant. No one suspected the deadly intent lurking beneath that smile. The team's carry-on bags were meticulously packed, containing items carefully chosen to bypass airport security. As boarding commenced, ordinary travelers chatted quietly, unaware of the storm about to hit them. Business people shuffled documents, parents calmed children, and teenagers fidgeted in excitement or boredom. Among them, the hijackers found their seats, strategically placing themselves to maximize control of the cabin. Section 2. Takeoff. 20 a.m. Flight 77 lifted from Dulles, a Boeing 757 bound for Los Angeles. The aircraft climbed steadily into the crisp morning sky. Inside, passengers were calm. Some reading newspapers, some dozing, some speaking on cell phones. Flight attendants moved gracefully along the aisles, serving drinks and ensuring comfort. The hijackers remained calm, blending seamlessly with other passengers. They had memorized the aircraft's layout, crew routines, and security protocols. Their focus was absolute, their intent unwavering. Section 3. Hijacking Execution. Approximately 30 minutes into the flight, Hanjur and his team executed the takeover. Using small knives and bludgeons, they forced their way into the cockpit. Pilots were stabbed and overpowered, rendering them unable to control the plane. Chaos erupted in the cabin. Passengers screamed and ducked under seats. Mothers clutched children. Flight attendants attempted to intervene, their faces pale with fear. Phones were used by a few passengers to alert authorities. "We are being hijacked." Cockpit taken, knives. "Please help." The hijackers maintained control with lethal precision. Every movement was calculated, every panic reaction suppressed. The plane was now firmly in their control, its trajectory altered toward Washington, D.C. Section 4. Air Traffic Control and Military Response. As Flight 77 deviated from its flight path, Boston and Washington air traffic controllers noted the anomaly. FAA personnel initiated emergency protocols, attempting communication with the cockpit. No response came. Military jets scrambled from nearby bases. Fighter pilots were informed of a potential hijacking. Communication between the FAA and NORAD was tense and urgent. Every second counted as Flight 77 accelerated toward the national capital. Section 5. Pentagon Internal Perspective. Inside the Pentagon, employees were engaged in their morning routines. Offices hummed with activity, phones ringing, keyboards clacking, coffee machines brewing. The vast labyrinth of hallways and corridors echoed with footsteps. Security personnel monitored entry points, unaware that a plane was approaching at hundreds of miles per hour. 9:30 a.m. Many employees paused to glance at television monitors in break rooms, watching the chaos unfold at the World Trade Center. Some assumed that a terrible accident had occurred. No one suspected that Washington itself would soon be directly targeted. Section 6, Final Approach. Flight 77 descended rapidly toward the Pentagon's western facade. The hijackers' control was precise, the approach calculated to maximize destruction. Passengers, if alive in the cabin at this stage, could only pray and brace themselves. The sound of engines roared through the fuselage, the city below a blur. The Pentagon staff, outside and inside, remained largely unaware of the imminent impact. Some emergency personnel had begun moving toward National Airport after hearing about the attacks in New York, but most were focused on routine duties. Section 7, Impact. 9:37:46 a.m. Flight 77 struck the western side of the Pentagon. The collision was catastrophic. Concrete and steel tore under the force. A massive fireball erupted, sending flames and debris outward. Office walls crumbled, ceilings collapsed, and hundreds of employees were killed or injured instantly. The sound of impact echoed throughout Washington, shaking nearby buildings. Smoke billowed skyward, thick and black, visible from miles away. The Pentagon's internal emergency alarms triggered. Chaos ensued and survivors scrambled for exits. Outside, security personnel attempted to reach the building, coordinating with police and firefighters. Emergency vehicles rushed toward the scene, navigating traffic clogged with fleeing civilians. Section 8, Immediate Emergency Response. The Pentagon's fire department units were first to respond internally, battling intense heat and smoke to rescue survivors. Medics triaged victims, providing aid amid falling debris. Law enforcement established perimeters, guiding civilians to safety. Military personnel evacuated offices, assisting those trapped in corridors. Communication lines were critical. Every radio transmission coordinated firefighting, medical response, and security measures. The integration of multiple agencies occurred in real time under extreme pressure. Section 9, Passenger and Hijacker Perspective. Inside Flight 77, the hijackers had executed their mission with grim efficiency. Panic, fear, and despair gripped the passengers in the final moments. Some whispered prayers, others screamed. Some clutched hands in hope or resignation. The hijackers remained calm, fully aware that their actions were irreversible. Every movement, every second had been planned meticulously over months. Their focus never wavered, even as the world around them plunged into shock. Section 10, Media and Global Awareness. News outlets quickly broadcast footage of the Pentagon aftermath. Reporters narrated live, struggling to convey the full scope. A plane has struck the Pentagon. Casualties are expected to be high. Emergency crews are responding. Across the globe, audiences realized that the attacks in New York were part of a coordinated assault on U.S. symbols of power. Panic, confusion, and horror spread internationally.